All right, we'll get started. It is 6 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission together for this joint hearing by the Klamath County Planning Department being held in relation to the FEMA ordinance. I would like to introduce my colleague, Commissioner Derek DeGroot. Our other colleague, Commissioner Dave Hensley, is joining us via Zoom. Hi, Commissioner Hensley. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is in the back. If everyone please rise and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. I will give some introductory comments, more of housekeeping, and then we will turn to our planning department and then the planning commission, and then the most important part, we will hear from all of you. As I mentioned, I introduced the commissioners, and soon you'll meet our staff for some housekeeping, if you will. We will be having public comment. At public comment period, you will come up to the microphone, you will introduce yourself, you will be sworn in, and you will have 3 minutes to give public comment. If you do have comment that's similar to something already said and your name is called, you can just raise your hand and say, you know, my comments have already been noted, or I am in support, or I am in opposition. The intention here tonight is to get feedback, but it's certainly not to make people who are uncomfortable at the microphone feel additionally uncomfortable, or to hear people pretty much reiterate the same thing. We just want to get a sense from you all on any comments, questions, or thoughts that you have. The timekeeper during that will be on the Planning Commission. Yes, thank you. And they will give you like a 30-second warning and then sort of a this. That means to stop. You can finish your sentence. You don't need to stop mid-sentence. But really finish your sentence or thought at that point, because we do have a lot of people here, which is fantastic. We're happy to have everyone. There's bathrooms outside, and we will take a break at some point. If we get to the 8 o'clock hour, then the chair of the Planning Commission may offer a break before we move on. If we wrap up before then we will not. So with that, I will turn it over. We are first going to have a staff report from our county planner and then our county public works director to sort of set the stage here tonight. And then I'll turn it over to the Planning Commission that will turn it over to you. And with that, Justin Throne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is...
We can sure try. And sir, if you want to sit closer to us or even move a chair up so that you can feel totally welcome to. Yeah, sit wherever you can best hear.
Can everybody hear me okay?
I heard somebody.
Okay. So my name is Justin Throne. I work at the Planning Department, and tonight we're discussing a legislative amendment to the county code, planning code, of Article 59, which is the flood hazard overlay. The National Flood Insurance Act is a federal piece of legislation that was passed by Congress and signed into law in 1968. The legislation created the National Flood Insurance Program. Since at least 1984, Klamath County has participated in the National Flood Insurance Program. As a participant in the NFIP, Klamath County is responsible for ensuring that our floodplain management, regulation, and maps meet or exceed the minimum requirements of that program. The NFIP also enables property owners within participating communities to purchase flood insurance that is underwritten by the federal government. Apparently, approximately 20% of the flood insurance programs in Oregon are not underwritten by the federal government. About 80% of them are through the National Flood Insurance Program. One of the job duties of the planning department is to also be the county's floodplain administrator, and so that's why we're conducting this meeting tonight. Goal 7 of the comprehensive plan, which was adopted by Klamath County many decades ago, has as its policy number 2 under Goal 7 the following: that the county will continue to participate in the Federal Emergency Management Agency's National Flood Insurance Program. The rationale for that is to qualify for assistance in time of emergency And the stated implementation is the county will maintain eligibility in order to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. So this is something that's been going on for about 40 years. However, FEMA, and it starting back in 2010, determined that they needed to actually update the maps because there's been a lot of changes in technology. And by the way, after my presentation, Jeremy Morris will follow up and continue with that and go into more detail. Because it's a change in land use that might affect the value of your property, the state ballot measure 56, which is the law in Oregon, requires that we send you these notices. So we sent 2,744 notices about a month ago to various landowners, all of which of you, I'm sure, received one. And we have to tell it in that notice that, in particular, that this is to notify you that Klamath County has proposed a land use regulation that may affect the permissible uses of your property and other properties. So that, when you saw that strong language that came through, that's actually a state requirement so that it puts you on notice and that there might be something coming along the pike that you should pay attention to. Our own code has a couple of criteria for considering a legislative amendment, and one of which is that it has to comport with a comprehensive plan and meet all the applicable review criteria. The other one is that the proposed amendment is supported by specific studies or other factual information which documents the need for the change. The second requirement is that the proposed amendment complies with the policies of the comprehensive plan, and I just mentioned goal number 7. That was established by the predecessors of the people sitting at the dais. Years ago, the Klamath County would, as part of its planning program, have a floodplain designated. And I will go through some of the suggested findings, or maybe I should actually wait till you're done with your presentation on that, Jeremy.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Any way you can make that any louder, I can't understand the damn word you're saying.
can you hear me better now? Okay. The proposed amendment is needed in order to comply with the requirements to maintain the county's participation in the National Flood Insurance Program so that local citizens may continue to keep their flood insurance policies through the said program in accordance with Goal 7 of the Klamath County Comprehensive Plan. This is a suggested finding for the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. This second set of suggested findings, and I'll put those up here. The proposed revisions are consistent with the following goals and policies of the Klamath County Comprehensive Plan. Number 1, citizen involvement, and that's why you're all here. The amendment has followed the public hearing procedures for a legislative code amendment, which provides an opportunity for citizen input. And then goal number 7, areas subject to natural disasters and hazards. The amendment is intended to protect life and property from natural disasters and hazards. One of the things that I wanted to mention, I started earlier, is this process started in 2010. It really kicked off officially in 2012, and the first set of draft maps were issued in September of 2013. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of consultations. There were different jurisdictions, such as the town of Bonanza and others that hired their own engineers to challenge some of the data. At the end of the day, though, here we are 10 years later from when it really took off in earnest. On May 7th of this year, FEMA has adopted these as their official maps, and they basically give us an ultimatum as a county. If we want to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, we have to adopt them. If we don't, then people who have flood insurance through that program will lose their flood insurance, and FEMA will not respond to emergency relief, or so they say, if we don't. This is a top-down program by and large. I think I'll leave it at that point right now.
So we'll come back to actions, and a few of these slides, I know folks wanted to take some pictures as we go along, but we'll come back to these once the Planning Commission deliberates. I'm Jeremy Morris. I'm the Public Works and Planning Director, and a couple months ago in August, we had a work session with the Planning Commission. We invited FEMA and DLCD, and they attended that meeting. As Justin mentioned, the maps have been around since 1984. If you drew a boundary around the 1984 impacted parcels, there were 5,400 impacted parcels. Since 1984, there's been 40 more years of development, and there's also been 40 years of storm flow data and flooding history. Again, Justin mentioned that the draft maps were in 2015, and so today, fast forward to 2015, we noticed about 6,700 impacted parcels, and that was a preliminary Measure 56. FEMA went back to the drawing board. They did some additional modeling. They deleted a seclusion area, which is in the south suburb here in the community, and published their current 2023 map that they adopted, and it impacts about 6,200 parcels. So we saw 5,400 parcels from the 1984 maps. We see 6,200 parcels today. And we sent out approximately 2,700 landowner notices. Some folks had 3 or 4 or 5 parcels, so we notified that person one time instead of 5 times. And so out of the 6,200 parcels, approximately 1,600 parcels have some type of an improvement. And in our GIS system, we have the ability to just toggle on whether a parcel has a bathroom, which is a good indicator of having an improvement. And we found 1,600 lots that have some type of improvements. So in Klamath County, we have roughly 65,000 tax lots. 6,200 parcels are impacted, which is about 10%. But when you get down to 1,600, that's a little over 2% that are actually directly impacted. And a lot of those were already impacted by the 1984 maps. And so we had on August 27th, you're more than welcome to review that. It's on the county's YouTube channel. We have an existing flood ordinance. It's Article 59. Tonight we are revising that flood ordinance to be updated with the 2023 maps if the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners choose to adopt. There is a link there. It's also to the actual flood maps. It's on the county's planning website also, if you don't want to type that really long website link in. So tonight we're having the planning hearing. We need to adopt by the 7th, and failure to adopt, as Justin mentioned, citizens would not be able to obtain flood insurance. So if you're buying a new house and you need a mortgage, banks, because they actually own your house until you pay the bank off, the banks are the ones that require you to have flood insurance. The county does not. You can build inside of a floodplain, and we'll get to that, but there's some construction standards that need to be taken into place in order to allow water to flow through, like your crawl space and those types of things. And if the county were to not adopt these maps, we would be thrown into a really awkward period of time where folks can't get insurance. We wouldn't be eligible to receive FEMA funding in an emergency if we had flooding, and basically FEMA would start the time clock on the county having to do our own flood insurance map rate studies. So we'd have to hire our own engineers and surveyor team, and it would, to my best estimate, cost between $500,000 and $1 million and take 3 to 4 years to compile our own set of maps and models. And so in that 3 or 4 or 5 years, we'd be without the ability to receive flood insurance on private mortgages, and also not have the ability to get reimbursed in a large natural disaster by FEMA. Some historical floods here in the county. 1964 was the largest one on recorded history, and basically there's a star next to that in the records that says that it was so large that it wiped out all of the stream gauges and a lot of the bridges that we have around here And so they don't know what the actual flows were, but they were much higher than the 82 and the 97 floods were the really large ones in more recent years. And so you can see there, and I'll show a chart here in a minute, that 1997 set flow records for the Sprague River and the Williamson River. And just to put it in perspective, if anybody's seen the Link River, whenever the Bureau of Reclamation does a flushing flow, that runs about 5,000 CFS. And if you stand in the Link River Canyon, there's a sound that 5,000 CFS makes, and it's pretty impressive, and it moves houses and rocks and things like that if it were a flooding stream. I've actually seen houses floating down rivers before. I was in Walla Walla, Washington when the 96 flood happened, and saw log jams up against bridges that were 3 or 4 football fields large. So it can happen, and 5,000 CFS in the Link River. Well, imagine the Williamson River flowing 17,000 CFS, 3 to 4 times larger than that. I'll show some pictures here of the flood events that have actually happened. And so this is just a chart that FEMA has. You can actually see here's what their model said, and I can't quite read it from here, but one of those numbers down there on the Williamson said that they modeled towards the bottom around 12,000 CFS was their 100-year flood event that was modeled. And actually in 1997, over here on the right side, it actually flowed at 17,100 CFS, so it exceeded their model for a 100-year event. Here's a couple pictures from the 1964 flood. This is here in Klamath Falls. You can see the flood water on the left side is just below the windows on the house. And apparently, this is if you read the fine print of the newspaper, this is a river system that developed up by OIT in the hospital and just poured water down into the community. This is the Williamson River Bridge up by Chiloquin, just south of Chiloquin. If you were to drive over that bridge now, the water would be 15 to 20 feet below the bridge. If you read the fine print on this newspaper article from '64, it said that the water came within 6 inches of overtopping the bridge. In 1982, this is Saddle Mountain Pit Road. This is on the Sprague River. And yes, the only thing that's outside of the water is the Saddle Mountain Pit Bridge. And there's residences. There's about 50 residences to the left side of the screen over here in a subdivision, and there's 5 or 6 over here to the right side. This is Stuart Lennox area and Green Acres, we call that area, and it's a low-lying area that's really flat, just west of town, I guess, and that's in the 1982 flood. So the methodology that FEMA used is they hire a consultant, a private consultant, engineering and surveying companies, and they do this for thousands of communities in any given year across the United States. And the old days, in 1984, they flew aerial flights, took aerial images, and then there was a contour system where you looked through a pair of goggles and you hand drew contours. Well, that was the accuracy of the 1984, and as an engineer, I would call that plus or minus a foot of accuracy. And it's very difficult in 1984 to model large river systems. They didn't have the computer programs that we have today to input data and crunch numbers and output data. So they had to manually input contours and manually calculate these flows. Today, you fast forward and we have a lot more technology. You know, computer programs, we have GIS, we have AutoCAD, and HEC-RAS is another computer modeling software that FEMA and their consultants use. They fly LiDAR flights today instead of aerial photo flights. Those LiDAR flights shoot billions of laser beams at the ground, and some of those, we call them a first return. So the very first item that hits vegetation and returns, that's called a first return. And then some of those laser beams make it through to the ground, and so we can delete the vegetation and run what we call a bare earth model from that. And so the accuracy is probably plus or minus 1/10 of a foot at that point. And they ground truth some of these river systems, and so they go out and field survey and verify cross sections of rivers and bridges in order to better hone in and calculate these how the flows would work going through bridges and other constrictions. We have 40 more years of storm data. We have 40 more years of development data. And so there's a lot of checks and balances with FEMA. And in the making, this has been 10 years in progress. So there's been a lot of checks and balances along the way. And so the purpose of the maps is to determine if a property owner is or isn't in a floodplain. And if financing is pursued, then the banks are the ones that actually require flood insurance. They have the most at risk. If you buy a $300,000 home and you get a $300,000 loan, you own your equity at some point, but in the majority of those situations, depending on a lot of variables, the bank has the most at risk, which is who requires acquisition of the flood insurance. And then locally here, and if you build in a floodplain, you can do that. You just have construction standards to do that. And as I mentioned, there's specific venting in your crawl space that's needed to allow water to flow through. And if you think of Florida, you know, they flood in some areas every 4 or 5 years. So what they've learned over time, instead of replacing these homes down at ground level, is we've probably all seen pictures that they build these homes on stilts. And the lower levels of the garage with no living space, and you have certain things in your garage that are at risk, and the upper level is the living spaces and the more valuable property. So that's just an example of a construction standard. I'm not saying that we would do that around here, but that's why they do it in other places. And essentially these models are ran by FEMA across the United States so that locals and or private landowners don't have to run them yourselves. And so it's just a standardized process to develop a model. So yes, you can build in a floodplain, you have construction standards. If you're in a floodplain now, you most likely you were in a floodplain in 1984 and you're in a floodplain in 2024. There is a few lots that are different, as I mentioned, 5,400 to 6,700, or to 6,200 actually. And so there's about, 800 lots difference. And so there is a way that you can take you can hire a surveyor and have an elevation certificate ran, and as long as your finished floor is 1 foot above the base flood elevation, then you can provide that to your lender, and depending on a lot of variables, they would probably allow you not to pay insurance. And so also, if you're within or closer than a foot or below a foot in elevation, you can fill in areas, and you can provide a LOMR or a LOMA, or a letter of map revision is what those acronyms stand for. And so there's ways that you can construct and fill and raise your house up if you're building a new house to prevent having to pay flood insurance in the long run. So the zones that matter, if you look at a flood map down below there, you'll see different colors. And so essentially the AE floodway zone, which is this first one, is the red area. And a way that I think of that is the moving water in a floodway. AE floodplain is the blue area or cyan area, teal, next to the red area. That's a standing, static water surface that is 1 foot or deeper. And then on our flood maps, we also have these orange areas, which is a zone X, which is 12 inches or less of standing water. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Planning Commission if they have any questions for, or the Board of Commissioners for county staff.
Yeah, let us get the lights, and then I will formally turn it over to the Planning Commission Chair, Randy Shaw, to run the rest of the meeting until it comes back to the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. If you wish to speak tonight, then please sign in at the table where Mrs. Gallagher is and provide information requested on the sign-up sheet. Because of the size of our crowd this evening, if you have basically the same testimony as the people before you, then we'd appreciate it if you'd just say, hey, I'm in support of that testimony, so that we can get all this done in a timely manner. To start tonight's hearing, I would like to ask the members of the Planning Commission to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Kevin Harder.
Clint Reines.
Stuart Decker.
Jennifer Fairfield.
Randy Shaw.
Justin Sparks.
Ryan McNiven.
Joe Young.
Consideration of the adoption, item number 1. Consideration of the adoption of revised Federal Emergency Management Agency flood insurance rate maps and an amendment to Article 59. I'm sorry, I don't mean to not make it so you can't hear me. Article 59, flood hazard overlay of the Land Development Code. Generally, the proposed changes could add or remove properties from the floodplain. The new maps also include some changes to the elevation of the 100-year floodplain. The base zoning is not changing. Adoption of the new maps and the minimum code standards of the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, is required by the county to retain its membership in the NFIP and for the county residences to have access to flood insurance. If approved, this would be enacted by the Board of Commissioners as Ordinance 45.105. I would now declare that the public hearing is open. The purpose of this hearing is for the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners to hear testimony and take action relating to proposed legislative amendments. Everyone present will be given an opportunity to be heard. That opportunity will last for 3 minutes, and the timekeeper is right here just to my right. An official recording is being made of what is said at this hearing. Therefore, persons addressing this body are requested to begin by stating their name and address. Speak clearly into the microphone. The order of the hearing will be staff presentation, which we have just had, testimonies from persons wishing to speak, questions from the commission, and responses from staff or others, deliberations and recommendations of the commission, and questions from the board, deliberations and decision by the board. Staff presentation. Before hearing from the audience, we will now hear from the planning staff. We've already done that, so if we have any questions for the staff, Planning Commission, please do so now at this time.
I do have questions.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm not sure who is best suited to answer this, but of the 27 or the 67, 6,200 impacted parcels, are all of those parcels that are newly in the floodplain, or are some of them parcels that are no longer in the floodplain?
Thanks, Jennifer, for that question. It's a mix. It's a difficult question to answer. There are some that were fully removed from the floodplain. So the 6,200 was the current number that the floodplain touches. If it touches one corner of your parcel, then that constitutes being counted in the 6,200. Previously, there was 5,400 parcels. But there are a small number of parcels that were removed, and there were a small number of parcels that were added.
Thank you. I have one more question. Can you speak to what changes need to be made to existing homes if we adopt these new maps? Do property owners have to make any changes immediately to their structures?
No, I believe not. It is a lending institution that if you are now inside of the floodplain, it is, and there's people that are inside the floodplain today that don't pay flood insurance, and part of the reason is they're banks who lend on probably tens of thousands of properties across the United States just haven't reviewed the maps closely to require that. I do think it's wise for property owners to understand if they are or their home is or isn't in, because then they can do their own due diligence. And so if you're inside a floodplain today and you don't have flood insurance because your bank hasn't required that, and then a flood were to occur, your insurance isn't going to cover that event. So it's very important for property owners to understand, and it's, if you're in the floodplain and if you're within that 12 inches, if you're 12 inches or greater, then you should be fine. But in some cases, if you're one of those new properties, I would recommend hiring a surveyor to get a elevation certificate to know whether you are or aren't. And related to construction standards, the building department does not require improvements to existing homes. A triggering event in the future would be if you were to add on to that home, and I think that there's a 50% evaluation that comes into play from FEMA is actually the ones that come up with that. And so if you have a $100,000 home, and let's just call it 1,000 square feet, and you double the size of that home to 2,000 square feet, and it's now worth $200,000, that would be a triggering event to update the home. If you have no improvements that are being processed through the building department, then there is no reason that you would have to revise construction standards on your existing home. The homeowner themselves could elect to do that themselves. If you wanted to better protect yourself and build to current standards, you can always elect to do that yourself, but there's no triggering event from the county.
Thank you.
I have a question I'd like to ask.
Hang on, you'll get an opportunity. Okay. Okay. If there's anyone here that has written material that has not turned it in at this point, then right back here in the back, this lady will take that written testimony when you leave the building, and that'll be entered into the record. So the testimony will be taken in the following manner. Individuals wishing to speak in favor of the proposal will come up one by one and be given 3 minutes to testify. Individuals wishing to speak in opposition to the proposal will then be asked to come up, and individuals wishing to speak from a neutral position will then be asked to come forward. I ask for anyone who wishes to speak on this issue to come forward. As we said, if you're in favor of the proposal and you would like to speak, step to the microphone, give us your name, and I think we have to have. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think anybody has been sworn in here, so you'll have to talk to this lady down here and give your name and address. So anyone in favor of the proposal, please come forward at this time. Libby, do we have a list of people? Okay, do you want to go ahead and just work off that list?
Yes, I don't see any in favor.
Nobody's in favor, okay. Wishing to speak in opposition?
So I have Matt Bidow.
You may have to speak into that microphone because folks can't hear you.
And Robin, just to keep it moving, can you let the person who's on deck know too, so they
Okay.
can start?
Matt Bidow. And then Becky, I'm not sure how to pronounce okay.
So I swear to tell the truth, whatever else you ask me to do.
Okay, please raise your right hand.
Yeah.
Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make are true to the best of your knowledge?
Sure.
Please state your name and address for the
My
record.
name is Matt Meadow. I live at 8705 Reeder Road. I really didn't intend to speak in opposition to the amendments per se. It sounds like it's something the county's got to do and needs to be done. So I don't have an issue with that. I guess I do have an issue with some of the changes to the map that changed the boundary, which was formerly in the 84 map, looked like it went to about the high water mark of Lost River. And now it spills it over several hundred feet and includes the residences that are in that property. And so I guess I'd like to register my objection to that officially, or make a record of that in any event. But I guess I did have a question when you were talking about the 40 years of additional data. Do you have new flood or flow data related to the Lost River? You showed a number of former floods in Williamson River and Klamath River and other areas, but has anything changed in that 40 years at the Lost River?
So Chair, I can go ahead and give a generic answer to this, but FEMA prepared the maps, not the planning department. And so I'm guessing they have 40 years of flooding and contours and all of that, but I personally didn't prepare the map, so I
guess
don't.
if I'm going to be limited in time here, so I guess I just want to say I've lived there 35 years, and my mom lived on adjacent property prior to that. There has never been a flood in that period of time, and none that I know of prior to that. In fact, the portion of the property where it appears that you're wanting to extend the floodplain to includes a drainage ditch, a Bureau of Reclamation drainage ditch as part of the project, the irrigation project, which the Bureau has approached us and wants to do away with because they don't think it's necessary any longer, because that area isn't subject to flooding and they're not worried about a flood. So to include our existing properties then and improvements into the floodplain at this point, to me, doesn't seem appropriate. So,
Okay.
but I understand you've got to go forward with the project, it sounds like. So that would be my objection.
Does that conclude your testimony, Mr. Bedell?
At this point, sure.
Okay. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have any questions for this gentleman? Hearing none, thank you very much for your testimony. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Becky?
He is my neighbor, and I have
Oh.
the same sentiment.
Okay, perfect. Do I need to swear her in?
No,
Okay,
and read to the next person and then the next.
okay.
Please.
William Farley. And then Emily Ketchum will be up next.
William, if you'd turn and just be sworn in by her, we'd appreciate it.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements, your right hand?
Right hand.
Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make are true to the best of your knowledge? Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is William Farley. I live in Sprague River. You want a post house box or
Yes, please.
box 11?
Thank you.
Sprague River?
Thank you.
William, you have 3 minutes.
I'm pretty new in this area. I've only been here 6 years, but on the map that we got at the courthouse, it shows all this in yellow here. Well, our property goes right down to that, but if that was to flood, that water would have to raise anywhere from 8 to 15 foot for it to get up and to where around any krells or buildings or anything. And so you use all your instruments for this, but nobody comes out and looks at it. All you have to do is go out there and look at the damn thing, and you can see this over here is at least 15 foot lower than what you've got marked on the map. So if they're going to change something, they should have somebody come out and visually look at the damn thing. And our place, we're not mortgaged, we have over 2 acres, or 2 miles of river frontage there. And this property here that they have in the yellow is not the river. It's a man-made, a man-dug channel, which they dug in the 1980s or something. I can't find anybody that knows why the hell they dug it. But that's what the deal is. It was dug way back then, but everybody claims that that's a river. It is not the river. It's blocked off. It's not navigable, you know. There's a sign at the east end of it saying that it is not navigable, you know. Yet nobody comes out and looks at the damn thing. They just say, well, we took a picture and this is the way it's going to be. If you don't like it, then go someplace else. Well, I've been in a lot of counties in Washington and Oregon and everything. I've never been treated this way in any county I've ever lived in, and I've been living for 80 years. So I don't understand that all this kind of stuff has got me where we're ready to put the place up for sale and get the hell out of here. So we put $650,000 into that community and got nothing but trouble out of it.
Yeah, I second that.
So that's all, this map is all BS.
So, does anybody on the planning commission have questions for William? Hang on, there might be questions for you. Does anybody on planning commission have questions for William?
Yeah, sir, could we see the map you're referencing?
My wife got it at the courthouse.
Now, is this of your parcel in relationship to the flood overlay? This is your place right here?
Right. But it goes on down, way down here. And it, see right here, they've got a little deal. The water, we've been there 6 years, the water has never even got within 4 foot of it. And out here in the middle, it's gotten two foot deep in 6 years. Other than that, it's not even come through there. And it don't come out of the river, it comes out of that man-dug channel, which we're going around and around with the damn government on that now, because we've got 273 acres there, they won't even let me put a cow on it, because it's been wetland.
Okay, William, thank you so much for your testimony. Greatly appreciate it. Could we have the next? Well, it'll be submitted for the record.
Okay, we'll add that to the record.
We got it at the courthouse, so
Yeah.
I can have that back.
Would you like it back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Emily Ketchum? Oh, okay.
The next two, and then you can still sign up.
Yeah.
Go over and sign up.
Come on and sign up. Harry Hansen, and then on deck, Ron. Please raise, you already did? Okay, okay. Okay, perfect, I'll call you, okay? Please raise your right hand.
Harry Hansen, 2338 Marina Drive.
No, thank you.
First of all, it seems to me that everybody that is on the lake side of Lakeshore Drive was included as a hazard zone. I'm at least 15 feet, if not 20 feet above the high water mark on that lake. Every dike in the community would be breached before water would ever back up into my place. I don't know how they gathered the data and included mine, but it isn't possible for water to be there as far as the existing lake and dike system.
Does that conclude your testimony,
Yes,
Harry?
sir.
Okay, hold on. We have questions for this gentleman from the Planning Commission? Okay, hearing none, thank you so much for your testimony, Harry. Appreciate it.
Ron? Not sure. Whites? I have no comment. Okay. Sam Holmes? Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make are true to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Sam Holmes, 1259 Shadow Lane, that's in Shady Pine.
Okay. And then Brett Dozier, you're up next.
I've lived in this county my entire life. One thing I do want to clear up, your statement about the water going up to the bridge on the Williamson River Bridge, it never got within 10 feet of the bridge, the top of the bridge. I know that because I stood on the bridge the night of the flood pushing logs off. It got within 6 inches of going over Highway 97, not the bridge. I'd like to know why there, in Shady Pine, the elevation on the flood map at the county is 4150. That's the elevation they marked. The top of Link River Dam, the elevation is 4150. The spillways are at 4145. My property, and I'm sure their property, my neighbor back there, is at approximately 4156. How does this whole valley flood before it gets up to our elevation? The water's over the dam, it has to flood the town. They've opened the spillway. If they don't, there's somebody crazy. It just makes no sense to me when they put these numbers out, and I'm like the gentleman from Sprague River. I don't understand their numbers and why they would enlarge an area that they didn't even have an established flood zone in when I moved out there. So that's all I have to say. But my neighbors are pretty upset about it costing them $200-300 a month in payments for flood insurance when it can't flood without flooding this whole town. And if it floods the town, it would have to flood clear down the Link or down the Klamath River, out to Keno. All water runs downhill. I don't care what anybody from FEMA, anywhere else says. I know water runs downhill. It's always done it my entire life, and I think it'll keep doing it in all your lives. It's not going to go anywhere else. That's all I have to say.
Okay, hang on. Does anybody with the Planning Commission have a question for this gentleman? Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Brett Dozier? Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make are true to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Brett Dozier, 9332 Reeder Road. Mostly a question for the rezoning of, I'm well within a floodplain right now, but it increases it from like a red, or into a red, and it's going to increase my insurance significantly. Does that change building codes? Like, I understand putting, you kind of passively went over excavation and refitting your home in the sense that as it's cheap, like we can all do it, right? I want some clarity on how the red overlay and the yellow overlay, and I know I'm in a floodplain, I can't fight that, but as far as like how that's gonna impact me, does that change?
Yes, I believe so, and that's a building code question more than, let's say, I don't know the building code off the top of my head. But yes, red is moving floodway, blue is static floodplain.
Right.
And so there's two different objectives for construction standards. One is flowing water through your basement, and one is getting rid of water out of your basement.
So I understand that, but I guess where do I find that information as far as like how it's going to change building codes before we move on with this?
We already have those standards in place for the 1984 maps, and they're in our, I believe they're in the Land Development Code, which is Article 59, and then that ties back to the building code. I would just call Alan Brown, he's our building official, and
Okay. Well-
he'd be a better person to answer that question.
Thank you. That's it.
It should be a clarification, though. On our mapping program on the county's website, we do have two colors. The red is 1984 maps, and the yellow are the ones that are proposed to be adopted. And that's a little bit different than the red and yellow maps he was talking about tonight. So I'm not sure if you were,
No,
which ones you're referring
It
to.
shifts my property into a moving floodplain.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what I was curious about as far as like retrofitting or anything goes. Is that gonna, obviously it's gonna increase the cost, but is it gonna change if I'm in a moving floodplain or a slack water floodplain?
So we wouldn't require any type of improvement unless you had a 50% value increase and we're proposing an addition of some sort. That's when the entire structure would have to be brought up to code, but.
I'm planning on tearing
But
my
in
whole
the
house
short,
down. And
yeah, in the
rebuilding.
short term, if you weren't proposing any changes, there's no revisions unless you self-elect them to self-perform them yourself.
Gotcha.
We're not requiring it.
Any questions for Brett from the Planning Commission? Brett, thanks for your testimony.
Stephen King. And up next is David Weeks. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements you make are true to the best of your knowledge? Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Stephen King. I live at 620 Front Street, which is right on the lake. I refinanced my house in 1997. I did not need flood insurance. Everything was great until Hurricane Katrina came. FEMA's out of money. What do? They increase the size of these maps. Now, you don't set the maps, FEMA does. And I think y'all been sold a bill of goods to buy into this. Because right now, my house, the threshold of my house is at 4315. Okay? The top, as he said, at the top of that spillway is at 4145. The only person that can get water to 4145 is God himself. There ain't nothing else that's gonna happen. And he's already promised he ain't gonna take us out again. I think FEMA is full of crap, in my personal opinion. I was forced to pay insurance that up to $700 a month on my house, that I could not afford the $3,000 to hire the surveyor like my neighbor did, and he got out of it. His bank said, okay, yeah, you don't need it. I didn't need flood insurance until after Katrina. And then somehow they got notified that the map changed. Nobody was at my house measuring, and I couldn't afford to pay $3,000 to get out of that rat mess up until 6 months ago when I paid off my house and I told them, go stick it. I'm not paying it anymore. And I think a lot of people, they're all, why is this floodplain? I know you guys didn't develop this floodplain, but I think FEMA's selling you a bill of goods. I don't think we need them, personally, and I don't know if anybody else agrees, but it just doesn't, it's not needed, in my opinion. If my house was underwater, 75% of the county would be underwater, and that ain't gonna ever happen. And I think you've just been sold a bill of goods by FEMA to buy into their little insurance program to make sure you're protecting us, which is what you guys need to do. But I don't think, if somebody just went out there with a stick and started checking elevations on places, you'd see there's no way in God's green earth you're gonna be affected. Yeah, no, I know.
Please direct your testimony to the Planning Commission.
Okay. That's all I got to say. I think you've been bought into it. And it's not, yes, if you're, right now, the way the maps read, the finance companies look at it, and yes, the finance companies are the one that require insurance, flood insurance. If that map didn't encompass your property 10 years ago, you didn't need flood insurance. Nothing changed, my property didn't go up and down, and now it doesn't include flood insurance. Unless you pay the $300 or $3,000 to a surveyor to tell you you're not. And I think there's a lot of people that are in the same boat that I'm in, and that's pretty much all I got to say.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. Do we have any questions for this gentleman?
I just want to clarify. You say your elevation on Front Street was 4,300
4315 is the front door of my house,
on Front Street?
on Front Street. It's right on the lake.
It seems really
It's
high
about
to me.
it's almost 2 foot higher than the top of the dam, yeah.
I mean, I think I'm only at 4,200 on the top of Pacific Terrace. So just,
Yeah, I don't-
okay.
Yeah, I'm about 2 foot higher than, well, I was 2 foot higher than 4141.
Okay.
2 feet higher than 4,141,
Yeah.
not 200.
No, 2 feet.
2.
2 feet.
I think we can cover that in deliberations, like, develop that question.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
David Weeks.
And then who's after David?
Kevin Rosh, and that's the last one. Oh, no, it's not. I'm sorry. We have.
I just have one other comment. I've heard
William?
mentioned several times.
William, we can't take your testimony like that. It has to be at the microphone, and right now, this gentleman is the next person up. We can get back to you if you need to.
David Weeks, 2460 Lakeshore Drive.
Thank you. Oh. I have to swear you in. Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make at this meeting are true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes. I live on Lakeshore Drive. I'm about 100 yards back from the lakeshore, from the lake itself. We're up a couple feet from the foundation, and we have a pool in front of us. I'm just concerned, we've been designated Zone C before, which means we don't have to have insurance, flood insurance. I just want to make sure that we don't have to with the revised maps and everything. Is that a legitimate question?
I think we can address that when, we're going to have a general discussion with staff here after testimony is complete. I think we can talk about that and address that then,
Okay.
okay?
You said
Don't-
Zone C?
C, yeah.
Yeah, don't leave yet. We might have questions for you. Planning
seen-
Commission, questions for this
Have you seen
gentleman?
a copy of the revised maps of where, of how it
No,
affects your
I
property?
haven't seen those.
Okay, so that question, we'd have to look at your property specifically to
Okay.
answer that.
So it might make us have to pay flood insurance?
I can't answer that without referring to the planning department. We'd have to actually.
Yeah, and I think, you know, after tomorrow, the next day, whenever, if you stop in down at the planning department, Justin Throne is the planning director. He'd be able to help you with that question, I'm sure.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for your testimony.
Kevin Rosh. And then up next is Linda Cedar.
Director over here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements that you make are true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And please state your name and address for the record.
Kevin Rush, 18020 Hill Road. I live below Horseshoe Dam. Is there, I know the people that drew all these maps up don't live here, never lived here. They're in a faraway land, make-believe. We've had these crises. My family's been here my entire life, my dad's entire life, my grandfather, and most of my great-grandfather. We've always had these little floods and things, but I think they're mongering, they're trying to stir us up because we have the technology that we didn't have in the 60s when they had that flood in 64. We can instantly open that Klamath Dam, start dumping water. You know, so it's not like we don't know some of this stuff is going to happen. If Bly has 6 feet of snow, okay, we might want to dump water now. And the Bureau of Reclamation knows how to do that because I live below the Horseshoe Dam, I know it says that it's a lost river. It's not. Okay, I own a mile of it. It's a drain ditch. It's an irrigation ditch. In about a week, they're gonna shut it off to where there's nothing flowing down it, but maybe that much water. Okay, now, is there any recourse for us to say, okay, we wanna challenge their little map saying, right now, they're showing it's right at the edge of my house. Okay, at the edge of right at my foundation. For that to happen, it would be 35 feet deep and 100 yards wide. That is not gonna happen. That's biblical Noah's Ark stuff, okay? Horseshoe Dam could break. Hell, I don't even think there's enough water on the other side of Horseshoe Dam to bring it up that much. Is there a recourse for us to challenge what their map shows? Because I have 2 other properties, granted they're down by Dairy Queen. But no, those did flood in the 60s, from my understanding. Do we have, is there going to be something for us to go, hey, can we have somebody come and look at this? Or is this written in stone and it's never going to change?
Jeremy, you want to answer that?
Yes, there is you can get an elevation certificate specifically for the finished floor of your house. And if you feel that there's substantial model issues, there's a LOMR and a LOMA. Those are letter of map revision or a letter of map amendment that would challenge the model. So there are mechanisms to challenge their model. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. I know this is going to piss somebody off, but if they do pull the Keno Dam, are they going to would they readjust this? Because a lot of the problems with the flooding that happened was they couldn't dump water down Link River fast enough. Well, if they pull the Keno Dam, that's going to lower Link River by several feet all the way to Lake Ewanna.
I don't know. It took FEMA 40 years to revise the map today. They'll probably move on and circle back and quite a.
It's just a question because that's where our bottleneck is, okay? Because I have close to the houses like on Altamont and places like that where Washburn Way actually flooded. And my understanding back, from my father, what he told me is they couldn't dump water through the Keno Dam fast enough to empty out. And that's where some of the water come from is it went, well, we have sewer ponds there now, but that's where it come from. But I just wanted to know, if they can, is this going to take 40 years if they do remove that, if they're going to redo it to where, in a reasonable amount of time? No?
I don't know. I can't answer for how fast FEMA's going to respond to a dam
question.
removal. So,
Okay.
sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on for a second. Questions for this gentleman? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Greatly
you.
appreciate it.
Linda Cedar, and then next is James Holcomb, and last is Cody Hoffman. What was your name? Okay. Is Linda here?
Linda Cedar? I don't see her.
James Holcomb? I have nothing to say. Okay, there's no more.
Does that conclude the testimony from those that are? What's that? Well, it's a little bit out of the ordinary, but William, if you'd like to step to the microphone and make any more statements, you're certainly welcome to.
Well, this is just a statement I've heard it said several times here tonight, that if you have any questions on this, you have to get a surveyor and have this done and that done and everything. Well, my wife and I did that. It cost us $4,000 to have it surveyed. We paid the damn bill. That was in 2018. It's not been finished yet, and they've told us they're not going to finish it. So if you're going to get a surveyor, you better watch your butt. And that's all I got to say about that.
Okay, thank you, William. Appreciate it. So do we have anybody in the audience that would like to speak from a neutral position? Did we have anybody?
You're really trying to be difficult. Yeah, come on up, come on up.
I just want to know if it's possible.
Can we get you sworn in real quick, sir?
Pardon?
Can we get you sworn in real quick?
He's been,
I've been
he's,
sworn
in.
yeah, he already got sworn.
I just want to know if he's talking about the cost of surveyors. Why do the people have to hire surveyors when you've got Google Earth? Well, here the elevation that's on the county map, and I'm assuming now that they had a surveyor do it. Google Earth gives me exactly the same number. So why pay for surveyors? Won't the county accept Google Earth elevations?
Well, I think we can discuss that after we close the testimony.
That's fine. I'm just asking the question
Yeah,
because
and I think we've got
most people have
some comment
computers.
for you there. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna, hang on, William. William, hang on. Okay, I'm gonna close the evidentiary portion of the hearing and the testimony. And we're going to go to the Planning Commission for deliberation and also for questions to staff. So, staff, would you clarify what an elevation certification is so that these folks understand what's going on there and how that gets conducted? I've been involved with a number of certifications and they didn't cost anywhere near $3,000. I mean, I just got to tell you that. I've had numerous transactions in real estate that were involved with flood certifications. They were $500 or $600. So I don't know where you're going and getting that kind of cost. Anyway, so could you explain what a flood certification is?
Sure, it's that's the fastest process that you have to contest the FEMA maps, and a surveyor basically comes to your house, and one of the gentlemen asked about Google Earth. Well, what the banks and the lending institutions are most interested in is your finished floor elevation inside your house and being 12 inches above the published base flood elevation. So I agree with Randy, that's a fairly fast process. I'm surprised if a few gentlemen said $3,000 to $4,000. I haven't heard of that. But they are datum specific. So if you look at the floodplain maps, it's NAVD 88, and your surveyors have to be on that same datum in order to compare apples to apples.
Okay, Planning Commission, we want to deliberate to some kind of a conclusion here.
Can I ask a question about the challenge?
Certainly.
Justin? Jeremy, on the challenge.
Why don't you pull that microphone over here?
On the challenge or request for revision, that really would lead to some sort of exemption, correct? Not an actual alteration of the map. At this point, the map is the map and nothing changes that. It would be just a specific, maybe something got attached to that title or recorded something about that specific parcel that would agree that it was exempt, or could you explain that to me?
To actually change the model, there's a LOMA, which is a letter of map adjustment, and then there's a LOMER, a letter of map revision, and then there's a LOMC, which I forget. Yeah, it's a conditional, so that's a temporary where you believe it's the model's wrong and you possibly have an elevation certificate, so you can get a pause for you to get enough time to actually do a LOMA or a LOMER, which is that does lead to an actual map revision, if that makes sense. You know, this is the initial model, and if you proved FEMA wrong and file a LOMA or a LOMER, the actual physical map would change for the future. They would draw the boundary around your place.
So there would be some sort of update that comes out to this model annually or something that would actually change what it appears to us when we look it up?
Yeah, and then those do convey with the land, if that makes sense. So somebody that did a LOMA or a LOMER in the past would convey with the land, so you don't have to repeat that process. A elevation certificate does not change the map or the model. That's basically proving that your finished floor is above the base flood elevation. It's just a down and dirty way to do it without having to contest the larger model that FEMA's built. The LOMA and the LOMER are the way to contest the model. An elevation certificate is just a way for you to prove to your mortgage institution that you are 12 inches above, and everybody moves on in that case.
Can I add too, the planning department keeps a record of all the LOMAs that have been filed with us. We have binders, and they're also mapped on a certain program we have, but there's a lot of folks throughout the floodplain areas who've already done that.
Would you mind telling us what that process looks like and what the expenses are associated with requesting a letter of map amendment or letter of map revision?
I don't know the costs. I don't know if we keep track of that, and what we receive in the planning department is the outcome of that, the LOMA or the LOMER, and it's basically signed off by FEMA is how we know that it's agreed upon, that it's meets those conditions. It starts with a survey. It is so similar to an elevation certificate. You would have to most likely hire an engineer at that point to, the surveyor would do more than just your finished floor elevation of your house. They would survey a cross-section of the river and several cross-sections of the river, and then they would model the flow in and the flow out and prove that there is or isn't a map change that would be supported by continuing with the LOMA or the LOMER. It is a process. It's more than an elevation certificate. There aren't very many of them countywide. As we, early in the presentation, we said there was, I forget, 1,200 lots that had improvements that were inside of the floodplain. And so some of those, or the majority of those, may have an elevation certificate, and a very few number of those have a LOMA or a LOMER associated with them. And I guess a different way to think of it is we have 40 years of LOMAs and LOMERs, and they're in 1 6-inch ring binder in the planning department. So
it's actually three binders.
Okay, but that much.
Yeah, pretty much.
Joe?
Ready? All right, Jeremy, I'm going to lead you into a couple questions. As you answer them, you'll probably lead to some answers from the crowd too. But first, I guess, is just Google Earth and Google Maps doesn't work as a direct comparison because the elevations they give are not ground truthed. They're 3 to 6 feet off in different areas. Sometimes it'll be higher, sometimes it'll be lower. So that's in the what they call the metadata of the GIS system itself. So it's not a ground truth measured point either. So it's just enough to get you close that you can kind of look at it.
Why does it match the same elevation as the map?
In some places it may. In some places it may, because if they can attach it to a benchmark of something that's actually been surveyed on the ground, those places will match up. But if you have an open field that has never had a level gone through it, it may not work. And so that's why a lot of places will want a licensed land surveyor and engineer to certify those elevations. The next couple questions kind of lead into that too is, Jeremy, maybe you can go into the explanation of the modeling. So a couple of the questions were, my property and the elevation on the maps are higher or lower than the dam nearby. So how in the heck would water pile up high enough to flood my property? And I kind of mean that as in, it's not just the downstream effects, but the models are built off of everything uphill of you, right? So if it rains in a 500-year flood rain event, that water coming downhill towards your property is also included in that model, right?
Yeah, that's called a tributary area. So they essentially draw a boundary around the area that's going to generate water for that water basin. It does, there's a lot of variables in that: soil type, vegetation, those types of things. They also have stream gauges that they, as seen in some of those charts, they know that the Williamson River flowed 17,100 CFS in the 1997 flood. And so they previously thought it was 12,000, and then in 1997 it flowed 17,000, so then they have to adjust their model. There is also downstream constrictions, and there's downstream backwater that can be, basically you pond water up and then water can't get out. There's levees and culverts that come into play, so if a culvert through a levee, I heard somebody mention Shady Pine, I just speculate that possibly there's a culvert under the highway that may not properly be sized. I don't know, I'm just speculating that that's a way to get backwater to an area. So did that answer your question, Joe, or?
Yeah, and then kind of talking to how, if that covers how the base flood elevations are developed. Some of the new layers do show an elevation, and some in the shaded blue areas do not. So if it was not shown, how would you develop that base flood elevation in those areas that it's
Yeah,
not listed?
That's a great question. We reached out to FEMA about that question. Really, they had a finite amount of funding for the study, and so what they stuck to in Klamath County was the major river systems. And so they modeled the Link, the Klamath, the Williamson, the Sprague. If you go further up north, we have like the Little Deschutes. I noticed the other day, and a landowner asked a question about a blue area that doesn't have a base flood elevation. If you're on one of those major river systems, you'll see black lines that cross the models, and those will actually report a NAVD, a vertical datum 1988 number. That's the number that you use to compare to your finished floor elevation. The areas without those base flood elevations, they basically have a 1995 process that you would work with FEMA directly to develop that base flood elevation in order to use. So we don't have a base flood elevation published, if that makes sense, in some of the areas because FEMA didn't have the funding to study it. However, they recognize that if development occurs in there, that they're going to do their best using their procedures that they have established that surveyors know about to work with a surveyor and a landowner to develop a base flood elevation so that now you can compare it. They just don't publish it out on the maps. It's a little bit, there's a little more work that has to go into that because that stretch hasn't been modeled yet, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. Planning Commission, we need to deliberate to a recommendation for the Board of County Commissioners. So I'm opening the floor up for someone to either further discussion or deliberate towards a recommendation. Don't be bashful now.
I'm kind of curious a little bit, you know, I think the liability on the county's got to be pretty high here. Do we know if there is, you know, I think hands are really tied up against the deadline. Do we know if there is any recourse that county or the commissioners can take to try to continually improve this for the community as we go forward? I mean, one concern I have is that this map's been out for, I want to say I've heard up to 14 years in review. I assume that there's been some pretty good, I'll say, corporate protection in that, whether it's, you know, bigger areas that are impacted, either, you know, local government, private corporations, things like that. It feels a little bit like the citizens are getting, I don't want to say considered here at the last, but potentially it's becoming late to their awareness that this isn't being impacted. And so do we know if there is a way to move forward but still look at continuing to make it better and not just, hey, this is what it is, you know, here's your sandwich, eat it?
Well, I'll speak to one of those things, and then I defer to the staff for another. This isn't the first hearing, nor is it the first workshop or anything that has been presented. There were a number of them that were presented over the last 10 years. And, because I attended 2 of them in the last 6 or 7 years. One that I can recall for sure was held out at Klamath Community College. And there were, probably 15 or 20 people there. I think oftentimes what happens is people don't, you got to go to work in the morning, you got to, there's all this other stuff going on. Doesn't appear that this is something that's worth attending maybe, or, what has happened. So this isn't the first notification, though, that's been out there. Not that it would have necessarily made any difference to FEMA, because when the ones that I attended, you had an opportunity to talk to the engineers and whatnot, and they basically said, this is the standard, okay, and this is where we're pitching our tent. And then it took a number of years before they could get funded well enough through the federal government to be able to come forward with this plan that they have. The other thing I want to speak to is that, look, this is the federal government, okay? We're Klamath County. We're trying to do the best job we can, but we have to be aware of people that are going to be hurt here if we don't pass this ordinance. It's just flat, that's the way it's going to be, okay? Like it or don't like it, it's going to be that way, because the federal government is going to jam it down your throat. Okay, so we're kind of in a hard spot, and the Board of County Commissioners is in that same hard spot. I mean, if we go against this now at this point, the deadline is November, 7th? Yeah, the deadline's November 7th. On November 7th, if Klamath County hasn't made a decision one way or the other, or at least a decision to adopt, then there's some real bad things that are going to happen to people. And so, we're doing the best we can here, but we've got some pretty nasty folks to deal with on this thing. Go ahead.
Got a question. What is the consequence if you guys didn't accept the recommendations?
I'll defer to the
consequences to Klamath County.
Yeah, I'll defer to the staff. Jeremy, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. There's 3 large ones. If you bought and sold a house in a period of time that we didn't have these maps adopted, you couldn't actually get a mortgage if a bank required flood insurance, because there would be no map to compare to tell if you are or aren't in flood insurance inside of the boundary, if that makes sense. The maps go away. The whole county is without maps, and therefore, no, that's what they tell us, is that you can't, we're without a map,
Is there anything like any funding that's going to be a consequence?
So the other,
Grants, green funding, or anything like that?
there are consequences with federal grants that some of them do require us to be in this program. The largest financial risk is if we do have a flood somewhere that FEMA wouldn't help. And so I know it's apples to oranges, but let's just talk about Umatilla County. A couple years ago, they had vast flooding up there, and it was $20 million of damage, and we'd be on our own as a county to come up with $20 million to in that scenario. And so by participating in the program, you're eligible to receive, that reimbursement and those funds in a catastrophic event.
Justin, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, just talking about, I assume that there's county property in the FEMA map. Is that something, am I hearing you correctly, that there's also, I mean, we're not talking just about liability for folks that have their private property that would not have flood insurance. Is there also county property that is flood insured that would be uninsured?
Yes, there's a mix of private and public owned property that is within the floodplain. And then just to further the question on what's at risk, is we would have to endeavor or pioneer our own flood model and study, and as far as I can tell, that's $500,000 to $750,000 in 3 to 4 years of effort, and so that's the period of time that we'd be without maps.
This, and if I can just add to that, Planning Commission, this is the letters that we get from FEMA on a regular basis. This one is from late September of this year, reminding us that if we don't adopt this within 6 months of the date that they adopted their maps, that we would be suspended from the National Flood Insurance Program. And if suspended, I'm reading word for word, your community becomes ineligible for flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program. New insurance policies cannot be sold, and existing policies cannot be renewed. And the difficulty is we do have confirmed people in the county who rely on that flood insurance currently.
Planning Commission.
People that actually wanted flood insurance, you said you have a number of people?
Well, yes, there's people in Klamath County that have flood insurance. The vast majority have it through the National Flood Insurance Program, where they're the owner.
I can't bet anybody in this town stood up and say, hey, I want flood insurance, when they're sitting 2 feet above the highest water mark that could possibly be.
Well, in your circumstances, that might be the case, but there are a lot of people that live along waterways all throughout the county that are susceptible to flooding. Just not you, but there are others.
Okay, Planning Commission, I'm still calling for someone to make a proposal or make a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with most of these people out here. They're stuck in a bad way, and FEMA's forcing this down our throat, but we don't have a choice as a county. We have to adopt the map. So I'd like to, at this point, I'd like to make a motion to accept the FEMA maps and move to the Board of County Commissioners.
And you need to also add to that motion immediate implementation so that that can be done in a timely manner as to the date of November 7th.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to go forward with the proposal, and that would have an immediate implementation. Do we have any further discussion?
I'll second the motion.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Any further discussion after the second?
I would like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
I don't like this at all. I don't like that FEMA is being strong-armed, making us do it, saying if you don't do it, you're going to lose, your community is going to be in danger. That's not fun, that's not good. No one likes that. But at the same time, it's very real. Our community needs this protection. We need to be able to have people be able to buy and sell homes that are in those flood areas without being part of this National Flood Insurance Program. That's not achievable for the vast majority of people. I don't like it. I know we have disasters all the time here, fires, whatnot. FEMA won't help us if we're not part of this. It's a strong-arm tactic and it's awful, but it's where we are. So if as a county we want to look at something else, we would need to be proactive in making a plan for the future. But in the meantime, I think adopting this is our best path forward.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any further comment?
I just thought that was a good point. I assume that, we're focusing on FEMA and flood specifically, but this is a totally taking us out of FEMA in general, which covers many other types of disasters. Also, one thing that is brought up is, a little bit of treatment by the county. I would say specifically, again, that this is not county specific. This is federal, and I'm sure that, like most things, we're probably one of the latest adopters of this in the state. We've held out as long as we can here, and I agree.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of recommendation to be passed to the Board of County Commissioners, raise your right hand. All opposed? Abstention? Passed unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now turn to my colleagues on the board and ask if there's any requests for clarifying information or any additional questions you need to ask anyone in the audience or staff. Commissioner Hensley. All right, Commissioner DeGroot, any clarifying questions or any reason to abstain from these proceedings?
So, yeah, sure. So, no reason to abstain, and no necessarily clarifying questions or comments, but some things that I just want to say. So, folks that know me know that I'm no big fan of the federal government in the fights that we continually have with them. And there are times when you get run over. And folks, this is one of those times. We're getting run over. And it sucks. I'm on TV, or I'd use different words, but folks that know me from a previous life, I was a mortgage lender for about 20 years. And I will tell you, every single mortgage that I did, no matter where the house was, it could be on the top of Hogsback, I had to charge people $10 to run a flood cert in order to get a mortgage. And if I couldn't get the flood cert, you can't get a mortgage. So it's not just people that they're saying are in the plane. Without a flood insurance program and without maps to refer to and using their website to go and get that cert, it shuts down real estate transactions that require a mortgage in this town for 3 to 4 years while we try to do our own modeling and spend money, quite frankly, we don't have to try to do that. We're flat out getting run over. We don't have the resources to fight it. We don't have the resources to produce our own maps. And we're sure as heck not going to shut down commerce in Klamath County in the meantime trying to pick this battle. Folks, you know I'll fight. I don't have a problem fighting the feds. I don't have a problem calling them out. I don't have a problem calling them what I think of them. But in this case, you also have to be a little measured and know when to pick your battles, and the battles you can win, the battles you can't. This isn't a fight we can win. So I say that so I can look you in the eye and say, I wish I could fight it for you. I do. I wish we all could. But you have to know when you can fight one and win one, or if you're going to fight one and you're going to just cause additional harm to your community. And this is one that if we picked this fight, we would just cause more harm to our community. I can't do that. So I'm going to be voting to uphold this and adopt these and adopt them right away. I don't want to say, I'm sorry I have to.
Is that a motion?
I will make a motion to uphold the recommendation of the Planning Commission.
No.
And adopt it as, emergency?
Yeah, I'll second it, and I'll just say, I don't need to reiterate what folks have already said, but so the planning staff and I have been talking about this for months. I serve as their liaison, and I'm glad legal counsel is here too, because as this was first sort of coming across our desks, my first comments to legal counsel was, how do we say no? Let's just say no. Find me a way for us to say no. And I was just dead set against adopting these maps. And as I worked with our legal counsel and planning staff, as stubborn as I felt about it emotionally, they absolutely convinced me, for all the reasons that folks have said, that there's just really, it would be irresponsible for us and for the citizens who need flood insurance or who might need a response to not adopt these. So I too will be voting in favor of them, and I want to read it incorrectly because I know we need an emergency adoption. So we have a motion on the table that has been seconded. Council, do I need to read anything specific in before I call the question?
Commissioner Minty, no, not necessarily if you do find that this is of an emergent nature. ORS 203054 allows for it to be read in total. I believe the requisites have been made that would allow for reading just of the title, but because it is of the nature that it is, wherein it's really a situation that you're not really excited about, but necessary. I would suggest reading the entire ordinance, the first 2 pages of that document you have. You don't need to read the exhibit, which is the actual development code amendment. It's coming to you.
All right. So I will read it in for the record. This is a matter of amending Article 59, the flood hazard overlay of the Klamath County Land Development Code and adoption of the Klamath County, Oregon and Incorporated Area Volume 1 and 2 dated November 7, 2024 flood insurance rate maps. Whereas the Board of Commissioners has the authority and desire to amend the Land Development Code text, and whereas the Klamath County Planning Department provided written notice of the public hearing as required in Klamath County Land Development Code Article 31, and whereas a public hearing was held today, October 22, 2024, with public testimony considered before the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, whereas the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation of approval, not anonymously, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Where everyone agrees. Unanimously, thank you. Whereas based on testimony entered in consideration of the whole record, the Board of Commissioners votes to approve the request to file number CLUP 2-24, whereas the state of Oregon has an ORS 203.035 statutory authorization delegated the responsibility to the local government unit to adopt the floodplain management regulations designed to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare of our citizens. Therefore, the Board of Commissioners does ordain as follows, whereas the BOCC makes the following findings of fact: the flood hazard areas of Klamath County are subject to periodic inundation, which may result in loss of life and property, health and safety hazards, disruption of commerce and governmental services, extraordinary public expenditures for flood protection and relief, and impairment of the tax base, all of which adversely affect the public health, safety, and general welfare. These flood losses may be caused by the cumulative effect of obstructions in special flood hazard areas, which increase flood heights and velocities, and when inadequately anchored, cause damage in other areas. Uses that inadequately flood-proofed, elevated, and otherwise protected from flood damage also contribute to flood loss. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Commissioners ordains the amendment to the adopted Klamath County Land Development Code text attached hereto as Exhibit A, incorporated herein by reference, is hereby adopted, and that Article 59 of said Land Development Code is replaced in its entirety by and said Exhibit A, done, and it will be done and dated and signed by the Commissioners. So we had the motion on the table. It's been read in for the record as an emergency ordinance. I will call the question. So for the Board of Commissioners, the question is on the table. All in favor signify with an aye, please.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. And with that, we will conclude and adjourn the hearing. So that's the formal part. Anyone who has questions is welcome to ask staff. If you're still unclear whether your property, where it's at, you can come to our office, or perhaps we can pull up the maps now and show you. But we're here for you to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for holding out. I think we started with 50 people and now there's 10, so thank you for staying.
So that concludes item number 1 for the agenda for the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners, October 22nd, 2024. Additional items, staff items. Do we have any staff items, Justin, to discuss?
Just a quick reminder, on November 6th is the public open house meeting for the Urban Transportation System Plan, and then on December 10th, there's a joint city and county planning commission meeting or a work session on the same topic. So just wanted to plant the seed for both of those upcoming meetings.
Okay, very good. Any planning commission items? Other business? And that concludes the hearing and also concludes the meeting for tonight. Thank you so much for coming. We are adjourned.